Thanks everybody for coming out here. How's your conference going so far? Excellent. All right. Hopefully you'll have some more energy next time I ask a question. So I'll get you guys started. So I'll be your host for this session. So I'm Prithpal Bhogill. I'm a product manager in the Google Cloud team. I'm part of the Apigee team, which became part of Google Cloud just about 18 months back. So really excited to have you guys out here. Just a quick show of hands. How many developers in the audience today? Oh, wow. Excellent. Awesome. So we will touch on some of the key aspects of, obviously a lot of folks out working with Cloud Foundry. We'll touch on some of the higher level aspects of what it really means to kind of start taking apps that you build on Cloud Foundry and turn them into APIs, and why consumption of APIs is so important, right? So that's the point that I'm going to focus on today. So we all know developers love building apps, and they use obviously proven platforms like Pivotal Cloud Foundry to build out of the newer services, microservices, apps that they're building, right? That's one of the big reasons you guys are at this conference. What we also see a very big trend, which happens as part of that app development, that microservices development effort, is behind the scenes, many customers are also modernizing their apps as they go along when they're building these new apps, which means there are a lot more APIs which are being built as a result of building these apps. On the same side, we also have many other trends in the industry, such as IoT, such as more modularity coming from your backend sources turned into APIs. So essentially what that means is you have a huge surge of API growth which is happening across the world. So there are a lot of APIs which continue to grow at a very, very fast pace. And then of late we see a lot of modern apps are being built using these services, right? So I'm sure across a few different sessions today, you may have seen how different monoliths have gone into microservices. This is a very, very typical design and architecture approach which many enterprises are taking. So here's an example of a very simple e-commerce system broken down into some set of candidate microservices, right? This may appear very, very relevant. So let's try to poke in a little bit and focus on, what are some of the differences between a microservice and an API, right? And here, many folks sometimes interchangeably referencing one versus the other, right? So let's kind of spend a few minutes talking about what's a microservice and how does it differ from an API. So out here is an example of an orders microservice. This may be something that you've written just in the recent weeks as part of your e-commerce effort. We feel microservices are more of an architectural style, and they typically represent the backend. This is where you write your business logic, you push your code, it's out there. Well, let's think for a second. The moment you have this microservice transcend your departmental boundary, it may be that you're just working in existing code into microservices, but perhaps they're only shared very internally. The moment they start to transcend, the use of that microservice starts to transcend the departmental boundary, or in many cases, the enterprise boundary, it starts to take a little bit more importance. That's where the API angle comes in, right? So every microservice, especially in the new modern world, has an endpoint. But this endpoint starts to become the contract. This is the front end in terms of how customers are going to use their microservice. It may be very synonymous to an HTTP endpoint, but it has a bigger connotation, as you will see. And the reason this thing is important is, as a lot of infrastructure, they still have business as usual, which needs to power employees and the end customers with whatever experiences that they're delivering, right? So let's just stay with this concept for a few. So once we acknowledge the fact that a microservice can also become an API based on some of the assertions that I just made, let's now take a peek at, well, is there a life cycle to it? Turns out there is. and is not simply just having an API endpoint. There are quite a few stages that an API goes through in its life cycle that are very important. So in this picture out here, you can see there's a design and develop aspect to it. Well, the design could initially be just contracted out by specifying an open API spec or a Swagger spec, if you would, which talks about these are some of the operations of that API, and this is how you access them, and here are some of the relevant, and here's the kind of responses to expect. But that's great. But as you start to take a look at that API, which is now not only being used inside of your organization, but outside the organization, you have to ensure that you have consistent security, right? And that's hard to figure out. Well, there's some cross-cutting concerns, very common cross-cutting concerns, such as security. Are they consistently secured using something like OAuth? Well, is that the developer's responsibility, or is that something which should be taken on by a platform, right? What about things like traffic management? Not traffic management to the extent of just doing there based on system level parameters, but more business. So what if your subscribers should have more fair share access to the pipe of number of API calls versus the other? So as you start to think about all those aspects, they start to plug in into the API lifecycle. Obviously, after you deploy the API, there is a full focus on how do you really publish that API. It's one thing to say that I have a microservice that has an API endpoint, but how do you ensure the end consumers? And in this case, the end consumers that we are talking about are application developers. These may not necessarily be the developers who are using Pivotal Cloud Foundry, but these could be the mobile app developers, experienced developers who are the end consumers of these APIs, which are using them to power mobile experiences or some other experiences. How do you get to the API? If the APIs are secured, do they just have access to it by themselves? Does someone give them to them manually? Are there some other things in place which can facilitate them to get access to the API in a faster way? So as we start to take a look at your microservices taking on a much more meaningful role and becoming APIs, which are shared across customers, partners, and other interested stakeholders, you start to get into some well-identified challenges. Great, I have many APIs, but how do I really control the sprawl? Well, are they all consistently secure, or am I now spending a lot of my valuable developer time? I have, let's say, 100 microservices. All of them need to be secured using. It's something which each and every developer should take on, or perhaps there's another way to be able to enforce those kind of things, right? Then you have things like insufficient visibility. Many times, this is a pretty interesting conversation I have with several customers. Hey, how's the API program going? Well, I don't know. I don't have the right level of business visibility. It's one thing, operational visibility into the health of your microservices and APIs in terms of how they are performing, what are their performance times, the latency, the error rates. But what about, is there enough adoption? Hey, who's really using those APIs? Of developers who are really after it. So those kind of things become very important. And hence, we feel APIs need to be consumable. They need to have the right kind of visibility for all stakeholders, not just limited to the operational folks, but also to product managers. If you think about, and you may have heard about this term called digital transformation, we at Apigee have been talking about it for the last 7 years. But really, becoming digital towards acting your capabilities as APIs. That's essentially what it is for many enterprises, which means product managers in today's world within these enterprises really own a portfolio of certain kind of APIs, right? So if you wear that mindset, how do you really then have a product manager manage their portfolio of products which are nothing but APIs? Do they have the right kind of visibility into which partners are driving most traffic than the others? All these things make you think, well, maybe we need something more than just, simply having what we call as a gateway. In many cases, you may hear about, well, I have an API gateway. I can really use that to provide a lot of these capabilities. I can use a gateway to provide consistent security policies. Let's say I want to do OAuth for all my APIs. No problem. I can stick in a gateway in front of me, and there are many customers who do that. and I should be able to get that requirement met, and that's fine. You may also have need for doing some kind of traffic management. We spoke about business quotas. We spoke about throttling. Although all these aspects are very important, and you do require a highly scalable, purpose-built API gateway to deliver those things, turns out in our experience, and Apigee has over 500 customers who are really enterprises of various shapes and sizes who are leveraging many of these capabilities. And it turns out that these things, although are important, but are not enough by itself. So what really is required is the ability to focus on many of the other aspects of API management which make API management what it is today. So we start with API catalog and discovery, right? So we were talking about the application developer as being a very important entity who can make or break your API program, right? So how do they really get access to APIs? And again, powering these APIs are nothing but microservices that you're building on cloud-native platforms like Cloud Foundry. So how do you get access? How do you discover them? Do you have simple and easy documentation to be able to work with the APIs? And once you do that, how do I really, in some cases, monetize some of the APIs? So this is, as you start to think about microservices and API maturity, you get into different aspects of your lifecycle. So we have several customers who monetize their APIs, which means one example is a company like MapQuest, another Apigee customer, where if you are building a mobile app and you want to incorporate some map-oriented semantics into your app, you can purchase map APIs from MapQuest. Well, as a company, as MapQuest, they need to be able to monetize the API. So do you have the right set of capabilities to be able to do things? Turns out, Apigee has exactly the API management platform for that. We've been part of Google for the last 9 months, but as a company independently, Apigee before that has been around for quite some time. In fact, we helped define this category of API management. And really, if you start to take a look at what are the core requirements of the platform, it does start with a highly scalable and purpose-built API runtime, which comprises of things like the enterprise gateway, and obviously with the new evolution of service meshes, Istio, that forms the substrate of the API runtime. And you have some higher level capabilities around mediation and transformation. Maybe you're not only just using new microservices. Enterprises today have still legacy code which they're trying to refactor. You need to be able to transform legacy workloads which are probably coming from SOAP XML into something like HTTP, JSON, and REST, right? So you need some mediation capabilities. As you start to think about some of the things we spoke about in terms of challenges for the APIs, you start to pay attention to visibility, right? Great. Operators, as they have the right kind of system level visibility into your pivotal Cloud Foundry deployment, when you now start talking at a higher level abstraction, do you have the visibility for all stakeholders for operational needs, for product managers to get the right engagement needs, and even for businesses? Because at the end of the day, when businesses are investing into an API program, they need their own ROI. So if you take the example of an order API, well, someone in the business wants to know, well, how many orders of greater than X amount are we processing in a region in the last quarter, right? That's information which you can readily get from the Apigee's API management platform without having to leave the user interface. All those capabilities are built into in the visibility tier. And the last one and the most important one is the developer ecosystem. This is where you have access to capabilities like the API catalog, a developer portal where app developers can go, check out the APIs, play with them, and have access to, in a secured way, to adopt the APIs. So, this is a proven platform built for growth. And again, we don't want you to take our word for it. We have several customers, several success stories. Apigee is available in the cloud as a SaaS offering. So you can use us in the cloud. We are inherently multi-cloud, even though we are part of Google. Apigee is also available on premises. So you can use us on premises and in a hybrid deployment topology as well. And here's just a quick quick blurb from Gartner, the latest Magic Quadrant showing Apigee in the leadership position, third time in a row, right? So there's a reason for us to talk about our platform, and you'll see how this kind of starts tying it with what we are doing with Pivotal and why you guys are here for. So turns out Apigee has been a long-standing partner with Pivotal for over 3 years now, and we are one of the 6 or 2 combined, if you would, of the 6 strategic partners that Pivotal has worldwide. And from a product perspective, we have 2 different product offerings that we have on PivNet, and we'll talk about them very briefly. The first one is the Apigee Edge Service Broker for PCF. So this has been out for a couple years. We have evolved the product line, and we included different kind of service plans. I'm actually going to show you guys a quick demo of that and walk through how the API lifecycle looks like. And then we also have an Apigee Edge installer, which is our on-premises software. You can deploy it with the same semantics as you deploy PCF using Bosch. You can take this installer and deploy Apigee Edge on a set of whatever your IaaS of your choice using the same semantics through the Ops Manager. Okay, so just in terms of quick announcements, we released a new service broker tile yesterday. It's available on PivNet, and we are going to release a new Bosch installer tile supporting our latest Apigee Edge on-premises edition before the end of the month, right? So they should be available for customers to use. So again, I'll leave with this before I get into the demo. As we start to think about the Apigee Pivotal combination, think about how you have your cloud native platform, which you've come to love, such as Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and how you are accelerating the aspect of how you develop and roll out software faster. Well, as that software gets pushed out in terms of microservices, you need to be able to expose them as secure and consumable APIs so your end application developers can build those kind of connected experiences. So we see several joint stories, and I'm more than happy to talk to you folks even after the talk around how some of those customers, and we've shared many of their names and stories in the past sessions as well, how they are ascertaining benefits by using the combination together. Okay, so with this, let's kind of switch into some demo sessions out here. Okay, so I'll start with something very simple, and this should be very synonymous. So I'm hoping the demo gods are with us today. So I will demo a few things. I'll walk you guys through the Apigee service broker. I'll quickly show you a quick deployment of Ops Manager. You can see this is Ops Manager. Here is the service broker tile that just got released yesterday that I'm talking about. This is what I will be demoing you in this session. And here's the Apigee Edge installer. Here's the new tile, which is going to be made available on PivNet here within the next few days. So service broker is very simple to install. Once you go in, you just set up a few different AZ and network assignments, but more importantly, this is the piece of setting which needs which requires the most attention. This is where you configure your Apigee Edge org and environment credentials. So think about Apigee as a multi-tenant system, right? So you have various enterprises who may have one or more orgs, and org is how we represent multi-tenancy. So one org represents one tenant, and it could be that for a bigger enterprise, they may have different orgs. Within an org, you can have several environments such as dev, test, and production. So this tuple out here represents the Apigee Edge org that I have access to, so that when this service broker is available and instantiated as a service within Pivotal Cloud Foundry, it has a check on which orgs you can publish APIs to, okay? So I'll go back and forth here. This is the Apigee Edge user interface. So let me go to the right org. So I'm logged in as an org admin into Apigee Edge. This is how roughly the Apigee Edge user interface looks like. We'll spend some time on a few different things. API proxies is a tab that I'm going to spend a majority of the time in. And you can see that there are certain API proxies which are deployed out here. An API proxy is a very fundamental construct within Apigee. This is where you define what your API endpoint is, right? So this is the API endpoint that you're going to share with your end users. Maybe they're mobile developers, maybe they're developing a different kind of experience. But within the API proxy, you can add different kind of policies, such as your traffic management policies, such as you can have OAuth and other policies in there. Now you could have 100 different microservices which are all front-ended by just one API proxies. You can do that. Or you can build one-to-one. You have the flexibility. And a lot of that will depend on your architecture style and what design pattern you want to implement. But think of this as being that front end in that microservice versus API diagram that I was talking about. And this is the endpoint that you're going to share with your customer. Okay? With these concepts in mind, let's go back to thinking about us as being a typical Cloud Foundry developer. And in this case, are you guys able to see this in the back? Okay, please yell. If not, I can try and bump up the. Okay, so out here, this would be very synonymous to many of you folks. So I'm just logged into I've targeted a specific org and space within a Cloud Foundry deployment. And you can see that the Apigee Edge service out here has 3 different plans: the org, the micro gateway, and the micro gateway co-resident. I will just talk about the org plan for right now, but again, if any of you folks are interested, please come down to the Apigee booth and we can give you some detailed demos on some of the other ones as well. There's actually a lot of content available on the content.pivotal.io/Apigee page as well. So here are a bunch of different services, right? So I have an instance of the org plan type created for Apigee. And let's take a look at the different apps that are deployed out there. Okay, so here are some of the apps you can see. I've been trying out some of these things out here. So let's take a quick peek at the catalog app. This is nothing but providing a list of APIs. So it's a catalog of different APIs. So if I very quickly show you the code, it's a very simple Node.js app. And all it does is it references a JSON object which it serves up, right? Pretty simple. So nothing too complicated about that. So in this case, let's just go and change this to 4. Great, so at this point in time, I have simply just made a modification to my manifest, give it a new version number, and let's do the simple CF push that you have come to expect, right? So at this point in time, I've just taken a simple Node.js app, which is, think of that as a microservice, but now turning into an API, which I can access very quickly. Once this is done, I will then start showing you very quickly how you can use the service broker that we have to turn this thing into an API and how you can manage the lifecycle. Okay? So let's give it a few seconds here. Great, looks like our app is ready. So one of the things we need to do is to now authenticate into Apigee. Okay? So when I just run this out here, you should see that I have, let's just take this for a spin here. Make sure it's working by itself. Great. So you can see I have this application running out here, which is what you would expect. Simple catalog, just giving me some more information about different pieces of APIs sitting around. Okay, so at this point in time, let's do a okay. Okay, so I've just kind of authenticated to Apigee and gotten a token. I'll just go and grab this this new app URL here, okay, and go back to my cheat sheet where I have all my handy dandy comments ready. Replace this. That should do it. So all I'm doing out here now is issuing the bind route service command, right? In this case, I am passing in the org credentials and talking about, how do you really turn this thing into an API. And when I do this, you can see that behind the scenes, the service broker is now taking the configuration in the ops manager, the tile, and pushing this API into Apigee, generating a new API within Apigee, and is then actually updating the routing entry for the PCF app in question. So let's quickly go out here and take a look at, let's refresh this. So you have this catalog app URL generated out here, right? This just happened as part of running the service broker command. When I come in here, let's do a very simple quick test out here. I'll just add a simple spike arrest policy. And we'll configure that to 10 per minute. And when I do this, we'll just now go back to the same app that you are accessing. And if I start hitting this app a few more times, you can see that the API management kicks in, right? Suddenly you have a spike arrest policy violation go off. In the same way, you can start adding a bunch of different API policies to it. But that's not where it stops. When we talk about consumption, we talk about several other aspects around, well, how do you get the right level of visibility? So if you now start doing this, automatically as the API traffic is flowing through, you'll get a lot of insights into how the APIs are performing. These are nothing but your microservices, right? What kind of experience are all the different stakeholders experiencing? Are they able to get the right kind of visibility into the performance? And more importantly, you start looking at things like developer engagement, and that starts to give you some more insights into the health of the API program. Now these microservices that you've built out, who's really consuming them? What kind of experience are they having? You can get all kinds of insights just from these visibility aspects. But this is not where it stops. It's all about how do I really take this thing to the next level. Within the same tool, you have the ability for you to be able to publish a portal. So from here, I'll just show one out here, which I have already published. Out here, you can go, and again, we haven't branded this portal, but you can think about different APIs that are available out there. You can take a look at the catalog APIs, which we just pushed over into Apigee, as something which you can validate as an app developer from here. A very quick example of another developer portal out here from one of our customers, PayEasy. They're a first data company. This is what we talk about interactive documentation. So if I'm a payments app developer, I can use a developer portal like this and get access to the API documentation. I can quickly issue commands and check out how to interact with the API. This is what we mean by low friction. Within a few seconds, I'm able to just click on the API, understand how to use that, and start working with it, right? This is one of the key important things from an API consumption aspect. So I'll switch back into slide mode here in interest of time. And again, we'll have more demos by the Apigee booth, so please stop in. So let's kind of think about, we went from using a cloud native platform like Pivotal Cloud Foundry to build a cloud native apps. You saw the differences between a microservice and an API and why you require an API management platform to be able to expose the API securely, but also push adoption. So API consumption, there are some simple KPIs that we normally see the first time to hello world, not only for pushing an app out there, but in terms of an API which is accessible. Taking a peek at your developer ecosystem. How many developers are engaging with the APIs? Are they really sending consistent traffic? Are you seeing a week over week jump in the traffic? Or if it drops, maybe it's time to investigate. So some of these KPI metrics really give you a pretty good insight into how your API program is doing, what kind of applications which are being built against those APIs. I think we spoke about some compelling developer experiences, some tools which are already built into the platform. As an API platform user, you can not only put policies in the API that we just saw, but you can, using tools, you can just publish a portal, publish API documentation, and you saw examples of a couple of different portals. So some of the key takeaways out here: leverage some of the product integrations that Apigee has built for Pivotal Cloud Foundry to automate your microservices to the API journey, right? Keep a track of the app developer. That's the final consumer who's going to increase the adoption of APIs and more importantly, drive consumption of what you're building on Cloud Foundry. Focus on the entire API lifecycle and make sure you're leveraging all what you have at your disposal to turn your microservices into a powerhouse for powering all the digital experiences that you care to. So with that, I really appreciate you guys taking your time. Hopefully this was useful. I'll be around out here for questions later if you guys want to. And we also have the Apigee booth if you want to see some more demos. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference.